This video is about the role of unnatural synthetic voices and their potential for sincerity in creative contexts. Unlike concatenative speech synthesis, which recombines short recorded speech fragments from a single speaker, and parametric speech synthesis, which models the source, filter and prosody of speech, WaveNet models the raw waveform of the voice signal, one audio sample at a time. The algorithm is a convolutional neural network, which learns from speech data, and then predicts the signal sample by sample dependent on all previous samples. This is a computationally expensive process which is able to generate highly natural sounding voices. If given audio recordings of an individual's voice, the system can generate a voice clone which sounds a lot like the original human speaker. But is naturalness always the criterion on which synthetic voices should be evaluated? In which contexts is the objective instead to find the right type of unnatural? When should we think of the synthetic voice not as a clone mimicking a human voice, but as an actor whose purpose is to perform, with sincerity, personality and liveness? Dr. Christopher Newell is a digital artist and lecturer with a strong interest in computer speech. He has a background as an opera and theatre director, in many cases using synthetic voices as performers. Dr. Newell's most recent project is a telephone box that talks with a computer simulation of his voice. The phone box, described as a tiny theatre, has an old dial telephone, and when you dial, the voice can be heard performing stories and poetry.
I felt that computer voices weren't being given any chance to explain themselves in their own terms. What is it that they could do that we can't do that would give them an expressive advantage?
Please hold the line.
You have dialed number 101. You have dialed number 101. It's 2037 and the future has stopped.
It's a kind of mini studio here, which allows me to do the Wizard of Oz, full Wizard of Oz thing. This is an old switchboard, and this connects to the telephones all around the house. There are several of them, but it also connects to the phone in the phone box. Determining the difference between Cereproc's voice, the one that they've created, and the recordings of me and live me, all potentially coming through the same source, coming through the receiver itself. It can be quite, gives me quite a lot of potential.
Be patient. Wait for several seconds for the handset to connect.
Hello, we have made a connection. That's good. Listen to me carefully, very carefully. Stay on the line.
Clearly, very simple things like they can speak text much faster than us. They can make rapid changes in pitch, for example. I mean, these are very crude examples that I'm using. Now, of course, someone who does extended vocal technique might be able to emulate some of that, fair enough, but a computer can do those kind of things very easily. If we gave computers a chance to find their language, I mean, this sounds very cute. They're, of course, not finding their language. We're giving them the language. But, if we treat them as performers who need to be given the opportunity to express themselves and to learn techniques to make expression more effective, and then we realize that our audience, our consumers, in effect, will also need to, contextualize that computer voice appropriately to get the benefit of it, then that seemed like an interesting thing to look at. It became a real opportunity to explore some interesting things to do with the performance of the computer voice and who I was and who this other version of me was, because this other version of me could say the things that I couldn't say because it isn't me. And I became more and more interested in this kind of hamburger. There was the real live me, there was the recorded me, and there was this me that never really existed, this synthetic version of me. And that's really what that phone box seeks to explore, is how those layers interact with each other, how they overlap, how the audience responds to them, what the content of them has to be, who is telling the truth, who's lying, who's being sincere, who's, faking it. All derived really from techniques that I saw actors using to evoke liveness that may not actually at that particular moment be rarely there. Actors work in the same way at times, it's a 20th century or 19th century notion that an actor has to empathize, to kind of live the role that they're performing. Prior to then, sort of 18th century, or even up until the end of the 19th century, there were manuals of acting which basically told you how to fake everything. It was much more perceived as a craft. It wasn't a kind of psychological exercise of drilling down to truth or something. That wouldn't have been interesting. What they were interested in is the performative components of it. I worked with a director who had a particular method of dealing with Shakespearean verse speaking, which it occurred to me was like an algorithm. Applying this method, they sounded good. They sounded as though they believed in it. They sounded as though they understood what they were saying, and it had plenty of emotional content, and it was quite surprising. It had sort of elements of liveness, spontaneity, which derived from a non-spontaneous, non-informed method. It was really just a procedure. And I thought I could apply that to computer speech. I spent some time with Dustin Hoffman, who's the sort of ultimate method actor, the opposite to the way that I was asking him to speak verse. And I just listened to the way that he used silence to make things charged with truth. I think any synthetic voice is an actor impersonating a human being. And I suppose most of the community in the field are interested principally in refining that impersonation, or ventriloquism, really, I suppose. And I'm not interested in refining the impersonation. I'm interested, I suppose, in most in finding the, if you like, the authentic voice of a machine, which may be able to be in its own way as expressive, but using its own factors to be expressive as a human voice. But simply impersonating a human voice is a worthy objective. I can see from the practical commercial point of view, that's what you should aim to do. From the creative point of view, just setting yourself that objective of getting as close to some neutral human being as you possibly can doesn't thrill me. I think it's very much in the ear of the listener what constitutes natural and what constitutes unnatural. So I've spent a best part of 2/3 of my professional life working with opera singers. And I've done lots and lots of workshops and things with young people who've never heard opera. And you'll see people doing this. Yeah. Because to them, it's unpleasant, it's unnatural, it's quite often laughable, they'll laugh at it, and it's as alien and unappealing to them as the most unappealing artificial voice. So what you become familiar with, what you become versed in, your capacity to sort of learn and understand how this communication is actually working, how that relationship between the drama, the sounds that are actually being made by the voices, the orchestral instruments, and the text, the libretto, you have to kind of have some exposure. You have to be, that has to some degree be explained. Reminding people of the artifice that you're dealing with, that this is all performance, every aspect of it is performance, is something that I treasure and value. It's actually extremely difficult to get right. Extremely difficult to get right. The difference between an irritating error and an error which is illuminating in some way and takes people, your audience, to somewhere different is well, tiny. And it's very easy to get it on the side of, this is really annoying, this thing is broken. If your objective is to kind of keep things interesting, to surprise your audience, and to keep reminding them that actually this is interesting because it isn't human. It's not interesting because it fails to do what you expect and require of it. It's interesting because it's doing something different, and that may reveal something about its character. It may reveal something about the narrative, which is more important even than perhaps clarity or comprehension. So mangling the words and or inflecting them in a very artificial and false way, in theory, can, in my view, I have to say, is really in theory. I like it. Is that good enough? I don't know. I like my stuff a lot more than anybody else does, so that it's hardly a fair evaluation. But I love it when it gets it all mangled up. It suddenly reveals something about itself.
Now dial another number.